Hi, everybody. I am Kelly. This is Uncorked History, where history meets alcohol for sparkling conversation. Although, as I keep pointing out, I'm doing a dryish January, so maybe I won't be so sparkling. So now I'll turn it over to Jamie. Hi, Jamie.
Hi. How is everybody doing?
Great.
Good.
Great.
Awesome.
Good.
My work computer died this week, so I'm doing excellent. All right. Well, tonight we are joined by some very special guests. First, we have Aaron Phillips, and he is a PhD candidate in the history department of the University of Alabama, if I am correct, hopefully.
Correct.
Studying Civil War memory in Northern Georgia, and you're also curator at the Fred and Dinah Gretsch Artifacts Collection at Georgia Southern University.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. We'll have to talk about that. That's very
Yeah.
interesting to be able to balance those two responsibilities. And I want to point out that when I was doing research for the episode, Aaron is not to be confused with the Aaron M. Phillips, who is a sci-fi fantasy author, apparently.
You're not secretly both, are you?
I was like, is he writing fantasy books too?
Downtime curation.
I've never heard of this person.
We are also joined by Rob and Abbey Westbury from Nagging Winery in British Columbia. And I saw on your website that you guys source a lot of your fruit from the Okanagan Valley. Did I say that right?
We are in the Okanagan Valley. So
Okay.
it's like locally sourced.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, I'm sure we'll talk a lot about that, but welcome you guys. We're so excited to have you.
Yeah. And so what is everybody drinking tonight while we talk?
Well,
Rob and Abby, you drinking your own wine?
it probably shouldn't come as a surprise that it's wine that we are consuming tonight. Yeah, and it is our own wine. We've got a red blend that we make here called the Pole, and a lesser known Germanic varietal called Siegerrebe that we grow on our property. It's a white wine.
Excellent. And Aaron, you are surrounded by alcohol.
So this has become, I don't know, this was kind of my COVID hobby in some ways. I think everybody picked up something, and kind of right before everything shut down, I had gone to this really awesome speakeasy, and I don't know, I was just enthralled by it in some ways. So I just decided to slowly start collecting and messing around with recipes and making up my own stuff. And almost 2 years later, and probably 90 bottles later, and books and everything you can think of, here I am. So but I'll be drinking some form of an old fashioned tonight.
Excellent.
Nice.
Jamie, how about you?
So since you're not drinking alcohol, I am making up for your lack of alcohol. I am drinking a whiskey and ginger ale, Jameson and ginger specifically, sometimes called the Irish Buck, and also a Guinness, because why not?
Also a Guinness.
Yes, in case you don't believe me.
I like the way you people drink. Nice.
All
Very-
Irish all the time.
My
Very
mother-in-law
nice.
is from Ireland, so I feel like I got to do her proud.
Yeah.
So I am, I'm doing a dry-ish. I'm not completely dry in January, but I'm not drinking on weeknights, which this is. Of course, I should just take the day off tomorrow, so it's not. But today's a weeknight. So I have been all month experimenting with various non-alcoholic things. Non-alcoholic or alcohol-removed wine. Not so great. Haven't found a good one yet. Still trying. I've got like 3 more bottles here. I'll see. Maybe one will be great. But what I have found that is excellent is beer. So this is Athletic Brewing Company. I don't know if you can see it, sort of. They have several different varieties. I've only tried the golden one, but it tastes just like beer. If I didn't know and someone handed this to me, I would think I was drinking beer. Unfortunately, I like wine a lot more than beer, so it's not a perfect solution, but it's pretty good. So cheers.
We had early on in our business, we had a very, very high alcohol wine. I don't remember which one it was. Do you? Anyway, we had to get it de-alcoholized, which is a neat process. They come in with this machine and they suck all the alcohol out. And basically you end up with a giant vat full of vodka and a giant vat full of water, like pure, beautiful spring water. Oh, I guess it's not spring water, but purified water.
Wow.
But it was impressive, and we felt like we needed to do something with this vat of vodka. We didn't, but we wanted to have some reason to have it.
It never occurred to me to wonder what happens to all the alcohol they're removing from these drinks that I'm having.
Yeah.
Interesting, interesting. All right. Well, we have lots of alcohol things to talk about tonight, I think. So Rob and Abby, maybe we can start with you and just hear like what inspired you to open a winery?
Sure. So, and some days I think stupidity was the prime inspiration. So I guess I'll answer that question because it's probably largely my dream. But it's winemaking is a second career for me, and I spent many years in consulting and human resources work, and always wanted to work with my hands throughout that whole period. And basically, after a few trips to a few wineries and callings of people in the industry, I said, this is something I have to do. I can't wait. And that's hence the name Nagging Doubt. It was my nagging doubt, something that was bothering me every day. I'd wake up in the morning going, should I really want to? And yeah, finally just did it. And this is our 11th harvest this year. Will be 11th years. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
2022.
That's right. Sorry.
This will be our 12th harvest.
And Abby, are you glad that you supported him in that?
Oh yeah, 100%. I'm a big believer in pursuing our dreams. He misspoke though. He said it was a second career. It actually is a third career for him. He started out as a punk drummer. So, and yeah,
yeah, you're very kind to call that a career, by the way.
we were living in Vancouver, and I am a New Mexico girl, and that rain was just brutal. And so I supported anything that got us back to 4 beautiful seasons and near some skiing. And the Okanagan is a really idyllic place for that. So, and actually since then, we both have gotten our WSET levels. And so officially we're sommeliers.
That's exciting.
On top of everything else, yeah.
So what's the process for becoming a sommelier? Like, I think we've talked to a couple people, but it seems like the process is kind of difficult.
It starts out very easy. They sort of woo you into it. So you take these little classes that are like a weekend long or maybe a month. And they start out as wine appreciation. And then the further you get into it, you learn all sorts of details. And then at the end of it, you have to have a test. And the test is really full of details. Like you have to be, and you taste a lot of wine, and you learn common identifiers and common wording. And you have to be able to take a wine blind and be able to figure out where it was from, when it was from, what grapes are in it. And it's very rewarding when you get it right. But it can be very grueling, especially if you're tasting stuff after the end of the day, you know, when you've had 25 in front of you or else. And then you also do like spirits and things too, which are at least, oh, I'm gone. Where'd I go? Which are at least distinctive. But yeah, that part of things was sort of an aside. It was so that we could understand more of the surface value of stuff. In terms of winemaking, it's helpful, but it's not the critical part of things.
Yeah, so for me, I also took those classes just because I was passionate about wine. I wanted to understand how professionals adjudicate properly. So if you've ever seen those movies like Somm, it is exactly like that. Like you spend a lot of time tasting wine, and you have to
stupid descriptors.
You have to take exams where you just are given a blind flight of white and red, and you have to not only name the grape varietal, you have to name the country it comes from, but then region within that country, plus full descriptors of the wine itself. And so it takes a lot of practice and a lot of time. My passion wasn't doing that. My passion was I really wanted to make stuff. So I quickly pivoted to attend Washington State University's certificate program. They have one for enology, that's the science of winemaking, as well as viticulture, the science of grape growing. So I took both of those, and it took about 3 years, and you can do it by correspondence. You have to go, a couple of times a year down to Washington State for lab work and field work. But that for me was just like, that's what I wanted to do, was heaven. And so I love working with my hands, and yeah, that was the rewarding portion of the journey for me.
And we simultaneously planted a vineyard here in Kelowna. The name of our city is Kelowna in the Okanagan Valley, and Rob was also simultaneously apprenticing with local winemakers and doing his day job. And we had 2 very small children at the time, so that was a busy time. But
don't do what I do.
do that. But so he had a lot of the people in his group were doing this sort of theoretically, and he had really his own lab at home to sort of experiment with. So a lot of it was learning by doing. But yeah, the passion was the big part of it.
I'm always impressed by people who can pick out like different notes and grapes and all that stuff, because when I drink wine, I'm like, I can tell you the difference between a Chardonnay and a Riesling, but that's about it. Like, if you ask me, what notes do you get? I'm going to be like, wine. What I get.
I often get asked, way too often, would I like this? And my answer is always, I can tell you what it'll maybe probably taste like, but you either like it or you don't, you know?
For me, it's different. I rarely can go to a party, and it usually takes about 30 seconds for someone's got a wine that they're handing me saying, okay, tell me what this is.
It's hard being put on the spot. Like, you go to a restaurant with friends and they're like, you pick the wine. And I just think, oh, if I pick something that's awful, like you're not gonna trust me anymore.
It's a nice party trick.
But for the record, because I've actually even read studies on this, anybody can adjudicate wine with just a small amount of training, and can establish like 3 or 4 distinct flavors in a wine just with, a couple months of practice. It's really not something that's not learnable. It's something you just train your brain to do. And I describe it like someone who's never seen a color before, well, they wouldn't know what blue or green is. You just show them that, well, that's blue. And so every time they see that, they recognize it as blue. It's not much different than when you smell or taste a wine. You just say what you're smelling or tasting is strawberry and blueberry. And then you learn that over time.
So my mom is in the audience right now, and I think maybe she and I need to just like quit everything else we're doing and go do this training.
Not at all. It's cool.
I think yeah. So Mom, if you're in.
You're hired. When can you start?
So Aaron, I feel bad that you're not drinking yet, because I think you're going to make a drink and talk to us about it. So do you want to tell us a little bit about old fashions and what kind of old fashioned you want to make tonight?
Yeah. So yeah, I kind of had the nifty idea to maybe sporadically throughout the conversation walk. Am I coming across okay? Because I just got this thing that said my internet is unstable, so I hope I don't drop. Okay. Yeah, to kind of walk through the history, I guess, of the drink. And the old fashioned is known as one of the oldest cocktails. I mean, it's in the name after all. But that doesn't mean that it was necessarily the first cocktail. For people that don't know the history of it, we use the modern in nowadays we use the word cocktail to mean any kind of mixed drink. You go out for cocktails, and that could be an old fashioned, that could be a Negroni, that could be a daiquiri, anything like that. But back, especially in as early as the early 19th century, the word cocktail was specifically meant for one drink, which is the root drink that became the old fashioned. So you had the traditional whiskey cocktail alongside things like juleps and toddies and punches and slings and all that kind of stuff. The modern term old fashioned cocktail won't come into vogue until about the 1880s. And then maybe in a little bit, I'll talk about that. So after we have some other conversation. But the original whiskey cocktail, as it would have been made probably around, I'd say this is probably around the 1850s variation, was actually pretty simple. So we've taken a sugar cube back in the day, and you would have soaked this in your bitters, soaked it pretty thoroughly, and then put that into your glass. And then we would have had, back then, it would have traditionally been whiskey. I'm going to go with tonight Uncle Nearest. Has everybody heard of Uncle Nearest? This is the coolest. This company is one of the coolest companies out there right now. Such a cool story in terms of the history of Nearest Green, who was the enslaved man who essentially taught Jack Daniels how to make whiskey. And they have this company. They're still up and running with the recipe, all these years later. And for anyone who kind of pays attention to the, liquor world, they're booming right now. So very happy for them. And again, a really cool story. Go check out Uncle Nearest if you haven't heard of them. And essentially what you would have done is taken your bitter soaked cube and added 2 ounces of whiskey. Gin was also really popular at the time. I couldn't imagine making this with gin, quite honestly. So we're going to stick with the Uncle Nearest 1856. And then you also would have added 2 ounces of water. And that would have been your cocktail. There was no ice back then, right? Ice hadn't come around yet, but you still needed dilution in the drink. So they would add water. And then just stir this up until sugar cube dissolves for the most part. This would back then probably been stirred with a toddy stick rather than a stirring spoon, and that toddy stick would have been left in the drink and given to the patron while they sip on their drink as they can stir as the sugar cube continues to dissolve. And it was kind of like a fun thing. People would just like to sit there and stir their cocktail while they drank it.
So what kind of effect does soaking the sugar cube in the bitters have? Like, do you get a lot of the bitter? What does that end up doing?
So really it just helps in terms of this one where you're not really breaking down the sugar cube at all. I'm not 100% sure. Still to this day, I like to make old fashions with the sugar cube soaked in the bitters, and then you kind of emulsify the sugar with it. You can top it off with a little bit, just like a bar spoon of soda water, help create a nice little paste at the bottom of your glass, and it creates a really nice evolution of the drink as you drink it. It'll be more bitter, and you'll get a lot more of the liquor up front as you start the drink. But then your last couple sips are going to be really sweet, especially if you have a fruit garnish or something in there. All of that stuff will kind of mold together into what you think of when you think of a really nice old fashioned. So this would have been the 1850s whiskey cocktail. So cheers.
Cheers. That's awesome.
It's delicious.
What kind of whiskey is the Uncle Nearest you said 1856?
Yeah, so this particular one is the 1856. This is their premium one. They have, it's made in Tennessee, obviously. It is aged in charcoal and maple barrels, which you can absolutely tell. This is probably the greatest advertisement that I can give for this whiskey, is that this drink is not great, but with this whiskey in it, it is good. So yeah, but they have a bunch of different kinds. I think they now have a rye, 110 proof rye. They have a whole bunch of different variations that are aged differently in different barrels and stuff. But this is kind of just the standard whiskey that you can get from them, and it is phenomenal. And I didn't realize how little of it I have left. So
I have to pick some up. My spouse's favorite cocktail is the old fashioned. So this is a new way of putting it together that I don't think he's ever tried. So I'm excited.
Yeah. So, I mean, the old fashioned is my favorite cocktail too. I prefer it with bourbon, which by the end of our episode, I'll be drinking my preferred one with the bourbon. And so, yeah, pick up some of the Uncle Nearest, and, you know, tell him that you're not going to make him an old fashioned, you're going to make him an 1850s whiskey cocktail.
Nice. So I think we had asked another winemaker at some point along the way, but I'm interested to know from the perspective of people who are a little bit further north in Canada, what effect, if any, climate change is having on growing wine, growing grapes for wine, making wine, what that looks like, and what sort of changes we can maybe expect moving forward.
Yeah, it's it's a great question, and it could take up a podcast in and of itself. And I don't know if anyone watched 60 Minutes a couple of weeks ago. They actually did half of their show dedicated to the effects of climate change in the wine industry, because it's quite impactful. Our product is entirely dependent on nature. Good wine has to come from good grapes. There's just no way around that. So what we are seeing are extreme events around the globe in traditional winemaking regions, in particular with Canada. This is a region where we could not really grow the species we use for wine 30, 40 years ago consistently. We had to use hybrid varietals. Those are crosses between traditional wine grapes and North American varietals that are not really great for wine, because those are the only ones that could survive the cold winters. With global warming and with temperatures being what they are, we are seeing tremendous amounts of wine coming from northern territories like England, Quebec, Canada, as well as Ontario, British Columbia, and Nova Scotia, Canada, which were never considered wine growing regions. So that's the primary effect. We use a measure called growing degree days. It's just a formula that was developed at UC Davis to assess the amount of average days where fruit can ripen. And even in our vineyard, when I compare weather records from early 80s to where we are now, I'm good 300-400 growing degree days higher. So that's the prime effect. The other one is just extreme weather events. So heat in BC this year, we had a real heat dome where we got to 44 or 45 degrees Celsius for several days straight. That's teetering on too hot for a vine. It can cause tissue death.
It literally burned it down to the ground. You may have heard of that.
Yeah.
Like burned it to the ground.
Right, and of course the corollary is that causes a lot of forest fires. That is another very big issue in winemaking these days. It causes something called smoke taint, and you can imagine just smoke can get into the grape itself. It's a semi-permeable skin. It's not hermetically sealed or anything like that. So those chemicals that are found in smoke can actually get absorbed into a grape, and that gets translated into a wine that tastes actually like smoke.
And sometimes that it can be very deceptive is maybe not the word I want, but insidious. So sometimes you'll taste a grape all the way through the season, and there's nothing you can do during the season if there's smoke issue. You just sort of cross your fingers, but you can press that juice and say, we're safe, we made it. And a month later, it shows up in the phenolics. So, and it's sometimes you can use it to your advantage. It's very interesting, much like a whiskey, to have like a smoky aspect to things, but sometimes it tastes like an ashtray. So.
And so Abby's right. It's a very complicated, wine chemistry is very complicated. And those chemicals that cause that taint, they're called creosoles. They basically bind chemically to things like sugar in wine. And so sometimes they stay bound, and you never, when they're bound, they're not volatile. You can't smell or taste them, but they can be cleaved off that sugar. They can, through certain processes, be made volatile again. And so, yeah, you can have a great wine in 2021, and then when you taste it in 2022, you're like, wow, that's now an ashtray. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing
I never thought about that. Like we've talked about like the impact on the actual like growing of grapes and how that impacts, the amount you can produce and that sort of thing. But I don't think we've talked about the effect that the forest fires have had. And I mean, considering California especially has faced quite a number of them.
All the west coast of North America has been very severely impacted by it, and France had lost an entire season to smoke taint. So it's a distinct problem. The other thing that we had happen to us this year was because of that heat dome, it came, we're at sort of the northern area of the Okanagan Valley. It's a very long, narrow valley, which is very fertile and lovely. And it's the northern tip of the Sonoran Desert, which is why we get those heat days. We have, because we're so far north, very long days. So we have a shorter season with longer days. So we have the equivalent number of hours that, say, California gets in terms of sunshine. But where we are is really pretty far north for growing. And our particular vineyard is higher altitude within the region. So we grow cold weather grapes, but it takes longer to ripen up at our vineyard than it does, say, 2 hours south of us. And when that heat dome hit, it was right at what we call bud break for one of our grapes that we grow on our vineyard here. And it makes the vine go dormant. It sort of shuts down and tries to keep itself cool for, it was about 2 weeks, right? And so what that did was push our growing season for that particular grape pretty far forward. Ultimately, it ripened. They turned out to be delicious grapes, but it meant that those grapes that we usually harvest in, say, September ended up coming ripe at exactly the same time as all of our grapes that come from the south. So we ended up having our entire crush, which usually is spread out over about 5 or 6 weeks, happen in about 5 days. It was insanity.
Not fun. 17-hour days for 2 weeks straight, basically, not a day off. Yeah. But I will say there are some, I don't think it's a good thing. It's better for Canada, I guess, and we couldn't grow grapes here before, now we can, but there are some things that we benefit from with these extreme events. So one of the prime pathogens we face in a vineyard is called powdery mildew. It's just a fungus that's everywhere on the planet, but it loves to infect grapevines. But temperatures over 40 degrees, especially 44 degrees, it's lethal to that spore. So I normally spray 5 times a year with a mixture of organic and commercial grade products to control that disease. But this year, 2 sprays, done. So,
which is great, because then we just hid out in the air conditioning for a little while.
Well, I'm curious for Erin, especially your pandemic hobby, right? Do you see any connection between the research that you're doing for the Civil War compared to the time period of the cocktails that you've looked at and learned to make? Like, is there any connection between maybe Civil War experiences and the consumption of those cocktails? Do you know?
Oh, so that is something that I have unfortunately not dug that far into. Trust me, I have contemplated changing my dissertation topic or something to somehow I don't know, meld my interests now in that. I mean, there's obviously great scholars who have done work on consumption in the war era and stuff already. So I think I would kind of struggle to see how I would fit in there. But in terms of my specific research, I think when I looking at Civil War memory, and specifically what I look at in the mountains of North Georgia, well, I guess the essential question of my dissertation is that the North Georgia region did not have a traditional, I guess, Civil War experience compared to the rest of the Confederate South. Appalachia more broadly didn't have a traditional war experience. You had pockets of Southern Unionists in those areas that actively resisted the Confederacy, who are a large part of the individuals that I look at. You also just had, I guess, community resistance, not necessarily ideological, but community resistance just for the sake of protection of families and property and things. And the central question that I want to answer is, in terms of how the war in North Georgia is remembered, because now, if my parents live in Union County and Blairsville up in North Georgia. And if you drive around North Georgia now in 2022, ooh, that's weird to say, you see more Confederate flags up there than you do down here in South Georgia, where I am now. So the easy way to tell people what my dissertation is I want to figure out how that happened. If we know and there is evidence of Confederate resistance to the Confederacy, some very strong Union, families and communities up there. How come by the 1930s, middle of the 20th century, that region had embraced essentially a lost cause kind of neo-Confederate version of the war in their memory? That's what my research looks at. Now, how that I think relates to cocktails in some ways, and to the old fashioned is, so you start with this drink, which is the traditional whiskey cocktail, and then by the 1860s, by the war era, in some ways, you had by 1860, every bartender across the country would have had their own version of this. It would have, they could have changed the spirit. That would be the biggest way to change it. It could have been the amount of sugar, the amount of water they put in, the type of spoon they served it to you with. But also by the 1860s, bartenders were starting to experiment a lot, as much as they could in the middle of the Civil War. So in the 1860s, you get kind of what is called the improved whiskey cocktail. And I can make, these are fun, and this is a really fun drink. So I can make one of these real quick too. But for the time, bartenders were getting pretty wacky. So what you would start with is you'd still go with your Angostura bitters, and then rather than the sugar cube, they would do a sugar syrup, which I have prepared, and not just the sugar syrup, it would be a gum syrup, GOMME, which is a simple syrup made with the addition of ground up and powdered acacia, I think is that how you say it? Acacia, which gives it a really nice velvet mouth feel, makes it a really enjoyable drink. So you would have had about 2 bar spoons, or essentially a quarter of an ounce of that. And that right there is just so much thicker already than just a normal simple syrup. So we'd have that. Sometimes they would get a little wild and add in some curacao. So we'll add in a little bit of that, about 2 bar spoons again. This particular recipe, I kind of made a hodgepodge of some recipes from around the time that I found in David Wondrich's book, Imbibe. If you haven't read that book and you're interested, go read it. It's awesome. But I've put some recipes together. This one calls for a dash or 2 of absinthe. So we're getting crazy here. I don't have a dasher. I have it in a spray bottle. So I'm going to spray that in there. And then we would have some maraschino liqueur, about a quarter of an ounce of that as well. And then 2 ounces of a rye whiskey. So we're, again, kind of evolving from just the regular whiskey and going with a rye. There we go. And then we would drop in our ice cube, because we have ice at this point, and people like it served cold. Drop in a cube.
So with the combination of the syrup and the maraschino liqueur, does it end up being really sweet?
Yes. Not only with that, but with the curacao as well, that's going to add to it. This particular rye whiskey that I've used Has some hints of cinnamon, cocoa, maybe. Yeah. So we have that. So this is for a cocktail in the mid 19th century. This is an incredibly enjoyable cocktail.
It seems like an incredibly complex cocktail.
Well, it's funny. We'll talk about that, and then you would garnish with an orange twist or a lemon twist, and this would be the 1860s-ish improved whiskey cocktail. And boy, is that improved. This is an amazing drink.
Aaron, I have to ask you, do you make your own sugar syrups?
I do. Yes, yeah. I do my own sugar syrups. I've started infusing and making my own just liqueurs in general. We had a small New Year's Eve gathering with some friends. And I bartended for that, and I came up with a cocktail that I needed pear liqueur. I just figured pear would go well, but I didn't have time to drive to Savannah, which is about an hour from here, and get it, or they couldn't get it shipped in time. So I was like, you know what? I have 48 hours or so. That's just enough time, I think, to make one myself. So I did that, and it turned out incredible. But yeah, I am a firm believer. I try not to be too snobby about things, but I'm a firm believer in if you want a true cocktail, a good cocktail, you can't buy the old fashioned mixes from Walmart and stuff. I'm sorry. You got to get your bitters, you got to make your own sugar syrups, that kind of thing. So yeah,
I'm definitely snobby when it comes to alcohol, and you're right up my alley here on this one. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm constantly standing at the stove, just stirring a pot of something. And every day my girlfriend walks in and she'll go, what are you making now?
I did that to him. So Aaron, that seems like quite a leap from the first iteration to that one. Are they from the same area?
So again, this was, and to be fair, this is kind of from probably a dozen or so different variations of the improved cocktail that I could find in the historical record. I kind of chose the most common ingredients that I saw in those and came up with my, I guess a representative version of what you might see. Again, as with this one, and as with drinks today, every bartender is going to have their own variation of them. But if you were to walk into any of the moderate to high end bars, I think at the time, something like this probably would have been what you got. Now, just very quickly, and then we can move on. And getting back to how this coincides with my research a little bit, I love this drink. This is a phenomenal drink, as I said, but not everybody did, and at the time, and it's certainly not because it didn't taste good. So why didn't they like it? It is interestingly more of an ideological thing. People at the time remembered this drink from a decade ago, and then they see drinks like this being served at bars. And we were just talking about being cocktail snobs. People started to become cocktail snobs, but kind of in the reverse order, like the reverse version of what we would consider a cocktail snob today. They essentially said, this is too much. I feel like a city boy. I feel, a little, I don't know, extra drinking this. I want this. I want you to make me a whiskey cocktail the old-fashioned way. So that's where, by the 1880s, the term old-fashioned comes from. And
it's the back in my day drink.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a get off my lawn. Give me, it's totally 100% that. And I'll skip over the 1880s one, I guess, because that was essentially. But it's funny because the 1880s old fashioned, what we would now call the old fashioned, was kind of a historical anachronism in and of itself, because they wanted it served the old way. They didn't want the maraschino. They didn't want the absinthe. They, didn't want the syrup. Definitely not the syrup. They wanted the bitter soaked cube. They wanted the whiskey, and it made the traditional way. But they were fine with the ice, and they were fine with the orange twist. So they were huffing and puffing about, the drink. But then they were like, I'm sure if you handed them one without the orange peel, they could have been like, where's my orange peel? So, but that 1880s old fashioned, the base drink of what we now call the old fashioned, was essentially this, sugar cube and bitter, soaked in bitters, 2 ounces of a whiskey or a rye, stirred over ice, and put a garnish on it. So we've got, I don't know how much time we have, but really one more drink to talk about after that. And then, so.
I'll just say that you're a lot more advanced than I was when I tried making infused alcohols. To be fair, I was in my 20s and kind of stupid. So I made Skittles vodka.
You made a drink last week that was pickle juice and vodka, so I'm not sure that
pickle
you've
juice I
advanced
could
that
go
much.
for.
Hey, I have
Dill martinis are delicious.
I love pickle juice.
Pickle juice, vodka, dill martini. It's perfect.
Yeah, you can't see it down on my shelf here, but my bottom shelf is all of kind of like my infusions and things. But I still have, I probably should toss it at this point, but I still have a candy corn infused gin from Halloween time. Oh, come on. You don't like candy corn?
I'm a big lover of candy corn. I'm a big lover of candy corn, and I really like gin, but I just.
Oh no, I made these marvelous candy corn martinis on Halloween, and it was great. So
I would try one. I would try a candy corn martini.
Were they 3 colors?
Yeah.
No, I couldn't get that fancy, but I did have. I guess it was technically more of like a gin sour than a martini, because I made it with an egg white in the cocktail as well. So you had the orange, gin at the base, and then you had that nice egg white foam at the top. And I guess I could then, I could maybe like caramelize an orange twist or something and put it on top, and it would be orange, white, orange. So next year,
Next year, improve your game.
Next year. So we have a question in the chat for Abby and Rob, and then maybe we can come back and Aaron, you can make us your final drink. So Abby and Rob, Brad would like to know, what are the distinct flavors of the region you are in, and what makes those flavors? Is it the air, the composition, humidity, soil, etc.?
I'll try and answer that quickly. It's again, that's another podcast as well. So absolutely, is it in the air? Yes, there's a French word for it. It's called terroir. It means that wine comes from where it's growing. I firmly believe in that philosophy. So certainly the climate, the soil conditions, the natural flora, fauna, beneficial and other, insects and animals, all of that, including the natural yeast strains that are in the air, all of that combines to make a wine that tastes only where it comes from. And the French, as you know, are very passionate about that. And they actually, if anyone calls a bottle of sparkling wine champagne, they send lawyers their way for sure, right? And no, champagne is only called champagne because it comes from that region of France. So in terms of Canada and BC, I'd say we're a very, very young industry comparatively. Really 30 years, maybe 40 years of experience. And so there's a lot of different varietals planted here, and there's a lot of experimentation going on. But if you want to narrow it down to a couple things, we make higher acidic wines, so more fresh, crisp, dry, which is a style I happen to love. And we tend to do really well here with certain varietals over others. So Pinot Noir and Chardonnay are really, really fantastic in the Okanagan. And I know it's kind of passé, but Merlot is actually one of my favorite grapes. And Merlot and Syrah are also really, really, they grow quite well here. And we're making really beautiful wines with them. In fact, there was a Canadian winery that won, it was called the Battle of Canada. It won the Syrah battle. So they compared blind Canadian Syrah with Syrahs from California, from France, you know, around the world. And it was picked blind as the best of the flight for Syrah.
So, and
I'm
our
really
region is
sad
very,
that we can't get your wine here.
I know, well, when the borders open up again, I will sneak across and send it to you. I just couldn't even drive down to do it.
Right.
But our region is very long and skinny. It takes about 3.5 hours to drive from the top to the bottom of it. And so we have very distinctive appellations, very growing areas. And so, for instance, in the southern Okanagan, which is very adjacent to the border, they get hotter. That is that tip of the Sonoran Desert. And so they can grow big, juicy reds down there that up here we really can't meet. We're really limited to the colder weather varietals. So really the only red that grows very well up in our area is Pinot Noir. But the whites do beautifully. And we do a lot of Rieslings in this area. We don't in particular, but a lot of our neighbors do. But things that are more Germanic and cold weather in origin, because we have, I wish I could show it to you, it's nighttime now, but I mean, we're under about 2 feet of snow right now. So those vines get pretty tucked away in the winter. We actually ski through the vines in the winter because we're on a hillside. So yeah, those things that need a lot of sunshine to make their sugars grow are not as happy up here. And then you had a question, somebody had a question about Connor, who was also a friend of mine from college. we shared a major and both ended up in wine somehow. I don't know how, but he did talk about ice wine in his thing. There are a lot of people in our region who grow ice wine. It's a big gamble. So if you're a small producer, you're really taking a risk. And so for instance, last year we had some strange weather. We had a big snowstorm very, very early, October. People were outside doing their crushes and all of a sudden there were 2 feet of snow on the ground. And so everybody thought, oh, it's going to be a nice cold year, perfect year for ice wine. And they let a lot of their grapes hang on the vine with the anticipation, because I think Connor talked about this, but you have to, there's a very specific weather temperature that you can pick ice wine during. And so everybody was like, yeah, it's going to happen. And then it just never got cold enough. So a lot of people lost grapes in anticipation of that. This year, though, all of a sudden in December, it was that cold. And that's a very early ice wine harvest, but a successful one. So yeah, it's
that's a tough one to make. I'm glad we don't do ice wine. Like if you can only pick during a certain temperature range of -8 to -12 degrees Celsius, and you can't wait. So as soon as it hits -8 and you have a 2 or 3 hour window, you ring a bell, get as many people over as you can.
Put on like baseball field floodlights in the wine.
You generally have to pick in the middle of the night.
And then press immediately too. Yeah. Like it's a,
you know, making wine. And I don't think I'll stick to regular table wine.
We're lazy.
Well, I will say, if you make it to Kelly and you bring her some wine, I will give you money if you'll bring her wine that she can then send to me. Although you're not supposed to send wine in mail. We'll figure it out, but I need some wine from Nagging Doubt. Also, I saw that there is a white on your website that I cannot pronounce for the life of me.
That's this one. Yeah.
It starts with an S.
It's called Siegerrebe.
Okay.
Oh, well, how do we? I don't know how to get. We have this filter on. We'll figure out how to get it too.
Let's turn the filter off.
But it's a German cold weather white.
Okay.
It's a cross of a Gewürztraminer. So it's very floral. It's very fragrant. It's very rare in Canada. There are only 15 of us in the whole country who grow it, and it's usually used either in blends or in sort of off dry or sweet wines. We make ours as a dry wine. We're very unique in that. I think we're the only ones who do it that way. So it smells like honeysuckle or lychee. It smells like it's going to be very sweet. It's delicious smelling. And then when you taste it, it's actually quite dry and refreshing. It's a beautiful wine. We love this one. It's
Well,
really unique.
Although
If
the
you
bees
bring
love
wine
it.
to
It's so-
Kelly,
They're grapes that you can eat like off the vine. Usually wine grapes are not good to eat. They're very, not juicy. These are the ones that I always steal to like make jam and just eat.
well, if you bring wine to Kelly, I would love your Pinot Noir for your red, and then I would love that for your white, because I've never tried that before and it sounds amazing.
Noted.
or maybe we'll just have to do an Uncorked History road trip at some point.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Yes.
When everything reopens.
Yeah.
All right. So, Erin, you've got one more drink I think you wanted to make for us. And while you do that, my mother has asked in the Q&A what absinthe actually is. So my mom and I are both huge fans of Murdoch mysteries, and they have talked about absinthe on Murdoch, but that's the only thing that knows about it.
So absinthe, I'm trying to.
I love Murdoch mysteries.
I mean, it makes me want to like go live in Toronto.
Well, I'm a huge fan
Toronto
of absinthe,
and-
so like we
yeah.
can just pair them all together.
Um,
I actually, oh, sorry, Erin.
No. Go ahead.
I had my first taste of absinthe when I was in my master's program. A friend of mine was dating a girl from the Czech Republic, and she had visited her grandmother in the Czech Republic and had brought back 4 different bottles of absinthe. I had only ever heard about, the green fairy of wormwood and all that stuff. And I didn't know that absinthe came in different flavors and variations. And I was really surprised. And we had a lot of absinthe that night. I lost, at the time I was dating this guy and I lost him. He just disappeared. Turns out he went back to his apartment because he didn't know what was happening. So
that
Good
sounds
times.
like a typical absinthe experience for sure. I don't really know 100% how to explain what it is. I mean, it is I guess at the base of it, what has made it infamous is the wormwood that is in it. There's some history there of whether or not the levels of that, used to be lethal. Are they still lethal? Like people it's whatever. But I think now it's more so majority other botanicals that are distilled with it. I don't know.
They have removed the wormwood in modern production of absinthe. So even in Europe, you can't get the wormwood version anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're very hallucinogen.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. If you don't like licorice, I don't think you would like absinthe. That's basically all that I get from it. I don't, granted, I only did 4 sprays of my little mister into here, and the original recipe called for a bar spoon. I think that would still be okay. But Ernest Hemingway famously loved absinthe. And that man would drink just 4 ounces of absinthe topped with champagne and stuff. And I can't imagine that. I've tried it, can't do it again. So
I love it. Well, I love black licorice though. So
okay.
So I'm one of those, like, you give me absinthe, you give me Sambuco, like every culture has their own variation of a star anise liquor, and I'll drink them all. Like if you don't like black licorice, you just give it to me. Yeah.
Good to know.
Good and plenty's tasty.
So I guess the last one that I want to make is, and this just kind of continues the trend of, and in some ways this is again how I think this particular cocktail maybe relates back to my research in terms of how the people in the area that I study, North Georgia, were just so flippy floppy in terms of their loyalties and that kind of stuff, and then Appalachia more broadly. But so we go from the traditional whiskey cocktail to then the improved whiskey cocktail. People get mad at this one and they want to go back to it. So you have the 1880s old fashioned introduced, and then by the mid 20th century, the Mad Men era, so to speak, tastes had evolved again and were a little bit sweeter. And somewhere along the line, the old fashioned evolved into, I can't really call it anything other than a monstrosity, honestly. But and if anyone in here is from Wisconsin, this is nothing against you, because this is even a good Wisconsin old fashioned is fine. It's great. This is not that. So the mid-century old fashioned, I've heard it and I've seen it called old fashioned #2 as well. This one, you would have put a whole orange wedge into your glass, and I should have gotten some like bright red maraschino cherries, but I don't have those, so we're going to go with the nice bourbon old fashioned cherries here, but we'll put 2 of those in there. And then a 1/4 ounce of just regular simple syrup.
Are you secretly just making a fruit salad?
Right, that's kind of how it feels. Our Angostura bitters, again, 2 dashes of that, and then at least at this point we are moving and bringing in the bourbon, so I can't complain there. But then we would go with 2 ounces of bourbon.
Is that Old
then-
Forester?
It is Old Forester.
Nice.
This is, yeah. Again, people can be snobby with their cocktails and their preferred liquors. I am, for my old fashions, I'm an Old Forester 86 guy. So we would have all of that in our glass, and then for some reason we would muddle it. Again, I don't know why. Here we go. Get all these cherries broken up, get the real meat of the orange peel. We'll do the pith a little bit just to get some of the bitterness in there. And then add our block of ice, or crushed ice was also very popular. Again, monstrosity. Mid 20th century with this, but I'm just going to use a block.
I mean, I feel like the people who invented this also made those Jell-O molds with stuff inside.
That is precisely what I was thinking. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the 50s, right? That's what they did.
Erin, will you send us the recipes for the drinks that you've made tonight so we can put them on the website?
Yeah, of course.
Excellent.
So this would have been the Don Draper old fashioned, the mid-century old fashioned #2. Wish me luck.
All right.
Delicious.
That is, it's all I taste is orange juice and cherries.
That's not so bad.
Yeah, it could be worse, right?
Yeah.
Just add some Jell-O,
Yes.
you'll be fine.
I don't know about the rest of you, but Aaron's frozen on our screen exactly with it in his mouth. You were drinking that for a very long time.
Oh no, am I back now?
Sorry now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wasn't frozen on my end, so you're good.
So those are 4 variations. I won't. I'll give the recipe for my preferred old fashioned, so that if folks want to check it out or try it, they can. I won't make it because I still have a few things I need to do tonight, and that could. I'm 3.5 deep right now, so yeah.
Well, we are close to out of time here, but
Yeah.
I don't want to end before doing Jamie's favorite segment. So take it away, Jamie.
All right. So we like to end the episode with each of us sharing a recommendation for the audience. And traditionally, it's things like the book you're reading or a favorite book, an album you like or an artist you like. But it can be as wacky as like, I don't know, your favorite kind of china, or you know, your favorite Lego set.
I recommended
mine,
knitting last
but-
week, so
So anything that you would recommend, and it can be even like non-physical. It could be like last week Kelly suggested that we learn to knit. So it could be something that like a skill you should develop, or but we're just really interested in what people come up with as far as recommendations for the audience. I don't know
Y'all
who
go
wants to
first.
start. So.
Please go first.
I can go first if everyone's still thinking.
Yeah, you go first.
Okay, so I have two this week. I often have two, sorry. One is the book that I'm reading right now that I'm nearly done with. And it is Lindsay Chervinsky's The Cabinet, George Washington and the Creation of an American Institution. She's a lovely person on Twitter, which is how I heard about the book. But it's also extremely well-researched, well-written. As many of you know, I like unsung history. I don't typically go for like founding fathers type stuff, but this is super, super interesting. And it's about to come out on paperback, so you should go check it out. And my other recommendation is my new Ida B. Wells Barbie.
That's so amazing.
That everyone should get. They also have a few others. I'm trying to remember who, but they've got like a whole bunch of historical figures that they're making Barbie dolls out of now. And
Nice.
I have interviewed Ida B. Wells' great granddaughter, Michelle Duster, who wrote a book about Ida B. Wells, and on my politics podcast, and she helped with the creation of this Barbie doll, helped with the design.
Amazing.
So yeah, go get an Ida
Well,
B.
now
Wells
I
Barbie doll.
regret we asked you to go first, because those are
I know,
fantastic. Now
thanks.
it's kind of hard to beat. Mine's
Setting the bar for us.
it's relatively mild compared to yours, but just really quickly, I watched this movie the other night when I couldn't sleep called Profile, and I would really recommend it. It's on Netflix. It's based on a true story of a British journalist who posed as a 15 or 16-year-old girl who was trying to get recruited into ISIS. And they ended up, at the end of this thing, they ended up arresting 6 people involved in this. But what is interesting about the movie, if you love film, the entire movie is a shot of a computer screen. So it takes place kind of like all online, which is a very difficult thing to pull off, I think, in narrative film. And I think that the film team did a great job.
Mine sounds silly. I recently binge watched Only Murders in the Building, which was so much fun.
I heard it's so good. I haven't watched
It
it
is,
yet. It's on my
and
like to
it's
watch
got-
list.
It's got so many inside podcasting jokes
That's-
that are hilarious.
It's just so much fun. Do it.
I think my recommendation, and only because I just recently listened to the most recent episode, which it's technically an older podcast. I mean, a year and a half or so ago. I don't know if anyone's heard of the Buried Truths podcast. It's hosted by a scholar named Hank Klibanoff, who used to work at Emory University in Georgia, or maybe he still works there. I don't know. Actually, I should know that. But there's multiple seasons of the show, and it kind of looks at Georgia history. And obviously I'm partial to that. And then the most recent season that they've done, which is also really personal to me in some ways, is about Ahmaud Arbery. And they kind of, just look into him and his life and tell that story from multiple angles. It's fantastically well done. It's personal to me because I actually grew up in Brunswick, there in the town where Ahmaud was killed. So it's been kind of a roller coaster listening to that. But they just put out a new episode, obviously with the recent updates in the cases and the trials. But definitely give that podcast a listen. There's one particular episode that I can think of where they're going back into Ahmaud's family history, and essentially they're able to trace that he is a member of a descendant of an enslaved family that actually had I think it was an African prince or something in his heritage, in his lineage. So and he would have been like, if that, you know, aspect of the family line had carried on, he would have been royalty essentially within this. I think it's now a tribe that is gone, that is no longer in existence. But that was really fascinating just to kind of learn his story. So Buried Truths, I think it's on kind of any podcast app that you can get.
That's amazing. My recommendation is not nearly as thoughtful. So I have two. They're interrelated, but first is, if you have not watched the most recent season of Queer Eye, watch it. It's brilliant. It's amazing. Absolutely loved it. And in connection with that, if you love Queer Eye or you love Legos, you should buy the Queer Eye Lego set.
There's a Queer Eye Lego
set?
set?
Yeah, you want me to grab it and show you?
I had no idea.
I can't even imagine how that
but
is branded. Oh, you like design houses.
It's the Queer Eye Fab Five Loft, and it has all of them. It has Antony and JVN and Karamo, and
That's amazing.
cool.
I have to put it
Jamie and I are
together.
all showing off our toys.
I love Legos.
You know
so.
you made it when you're in Lego.
That's right.
We have so many Legos in our house, but we do not have the Queer Eye set.
Well, now you have one to add to the collection.
All right. All right. Well, with that, I think everyone, we are out of time. So thank you so much, Rob and Abby and Aaron, for joining us. This was really, really fun. And glad we got to hear about all of your very interesting alcohol experiences. We are off next week, so enjoy the time off, everybody. And by the time you get back, I will be drinking alcohol on Thursday nights again. So
Yay!
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
guys.
Yeah, thank y'all.